All right, we're live.
Wow,
What's up,
it's amazing.
listeners? Probably no one's here live because we're starting 10 minutes earlier than scheduled. How
Yeah.
many podcasts start early, right? Look at us. Early bird catches the worm. Am I right, Brian? What does that mean
Yeah.
for us? I don't
Or
know.
I don't know. I mean, we were like I think one of the reasons that we still do a podcast is because we were like the first fantasy hockey podcast of our kind, really. So we
And we
were
want to be the last.
and we want, and we're gonna be the last. Whether that means we keep going or somehow all the others are stopped.
Hey. A lot of them end up stopping. Every once in a while, there's like, I'm sure if you go through our history of our chat, so you'd probably see like, oh, this podcast looks like it's gonna be like really popular. I think they might be more popular than us at this point. And like 2 years later, oh, did you hear they stopped? And it's like, oh, all right then.
It's
It's
it's the
happened
same
many
thing
times.
going back to the blogging days. Like the hardest thing is to keep it up. Like when you start, like you're energized, and then you get like your audience filling your sails, and then you realize that like you have to make time in your life for it. And
But for us, it's such a
then-
joy. I think it's because I get
well,
to
no,
chat
I
with
mean
you.
we made the time, but like
Yeah.
it's like it's a constant negotiation, and it's hard to keep up. So shout out to all the fantasy hockey podcasts that have been, and that presently are, and that will be. We're gonna outlast you all. Just kidding. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder how long we can go. How long do you think? Like you're in your
Sorry.
40s. I'm almost there.
Nothing about my age is gonna stop me.
Could we
I
be
fe-
50 years old doing a fantasy hockey podcast?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, most people on TV talking about hockey are like 70 years
That's
old.
a really good point. But podcasting is a younger medium?
I don't know. I mean,
I
it
don't know.
started probably. I mean, if probably the older people, like from the boomer generation, need their kid to like help them set it up. But by the time we're old, we'll know how to set it up. I think anyone can sit in front of a microphone and talk.
Yeah.
All right. So now Dina's messaging me
Oh no.
saying the baby's up.
Oh no.
So I'm just trying to get her to tell me like, do you want
Like,
me to stop?
To what
or,
extent is the
like,
baby?
are you dealing with it, or are you telling me because
But
are you
it-
just telling me for like because you want me to write back being like, oh no, or are you telling me this like I should stop?
But is
Okay.
this also one of those circumstances where you need to know without asking?
I don't know. All right, so Brian, maybe you could I'm just gonna write a chat message here and try to understand what's being expected of me now.
Okay,
since
while
we
you
have
do that, I see Edward just posted in Not Hockey the British call of the final play of the London series. So I guess this is baseball. I'm guessing Philadelphia and the Mets, the Phillies and the Mets were playing one another in London for a few games. And I'm seeing from the screenshot, London, England, I assume. The screenshot shows the Mets are up 6-5. Bases loaded, 1 out. The count is 0-2. And you're not going to hear what happens next because I'm just pushing play. This isn't good. Hi, is anyone... if you're listening and R. Pete hasn't commented, this is your only chance to beat R. Pete. How about
Unless
that?
it turns out that I have to stop. Do we even have a way that I can like stop and leave for 10 minutes and come back, but like make it a new start the video over? I don't think so. I think I'd have to make a whole new video, which would then probably be annoying that would be annoying because we'd have to update. So I'm just waiting. I don't know. She's just writing saying how Noah's coughing. So I'm like,
Oh,
should I-
coughing isn't awake. My
then I
my
said,
kid
should I
coughs into her
stop?
sleep.
Okay. Let me actually check the video myself because I'm just getting her recounting, but I'm able to
Okay.
check myself.
Well, the
actually.
update on this play, spoiler
Oh yeah,
alert.
what happened in this British
So,
softball game?
so the batter, it was like a broken bat
Okay.
grounder that like basically looks like a bunt straight ahead of home plate. And the catcher reached out.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
touched-
Sorry, I'll be back.
Okay, touched
In a
home
bit. Maybe
plate
like 10 minutes. Sorry.
to get. Oh my god! So
Okay,
I'm
but
just
you
gonna.
could always just like no,
Oh.
but you could talk for a bit, or if you want, you can like just be like, I'll be back also
'Cause,
in
like,
10 minutes. and
there's
then
not
it's just,
even.
like,
okay,
it'll be
'cause
fine.
there's not
We
even
have
anyone
unlimited
in the
space on
chat.
YouTube. Yeah. So and then
Yeah.
people watch live, they can just
Okay.
scrub ahead. So it's like
Yeah.
who cares? We'll have
All
our
right.
cameras off, so it'll be easy for them to see when the cameras turn back on.
Okay.
Okay. So talk to you soon. Okay. Bye. But you can chat for a bit if you want. Okay. Bye.
As catcher picks up the ball, steps onto home plate to force the out at home. And then this is the bottom of the ninth, too, by the way. Philly's the home team. And so gets the force out at home. And then on that step, uses that as like the plant for a throw to first that they just get to in time. And it's a double play with the bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth to preserve a one-run victory. Like the call was great. Like it's really interesting, Britain and baseball. Like baseball is definitely one of those things that is extraordinarily American, and I don't know if it has any links to England or to the UK. I'm watching it again. Yeah. How many things are American that you can't trace back to British heritage? I'm sure plenty. Um, all right. So no one's here. So except you. Thanks for watching. You're now going to want to scrub ahead. All right. Until Elon gets back, I'm gonna mute and turn off my camera. See you soon.
All right. I'm here. Hopefully we're good to go now. I messaged Brian, so he should show back soon. Sorry to anyone who I guess you would have seen why we stopped, but now we're back.
You're
So-
coming in with like your strongest NPR voice.
Yeah, it's hard to get the energy back up now. Ugh, after that, she was coughing. Dina gave me a spoon. For anyone who was interested, I get, I don't know if this is real or like a remedy, like a fake remedy, but
Cod
it's
liver
cool.
oil.
We did honey, a spoonful of honey.
Oh, it helps
Gave
the
her the
medicine
honey.
go down.
I guess we didn't give her medicine.
Oh
That
no,
was the
that's
medicine.
sugar.
Yeah, honey is supposed to help a throat if you're coughing, I guess. So I don't know. So we gave her honey. I gave her honey. I gave her water because maybe she's like, thirsty from all the coughing. I put her down. She seems like asleep right away because she's probably exhausted. So hopefully that did the trick. I think the coughing woke her up. Very, very annoying. She coughed so much that she got up and was crying.
I mean,
But
I'd be mad too.
yeah, but I would just be like, go back to sleep. But I guess maybe I would go get a drink of water.
Well,
So
like
she can't do
I don't know,
that.
you'd be like in distress. You're like, I'm awake and I'm coughing. This sucks.
Yeah, no, for sure. But anyway, here we are. I'm feeling good. You know what? I'm feeling hot. Like it's like all that excitement, and I was like, oh, ow.
It really felt. I don't know if you can hear me, but it felt like when you were returning, it was like you were making a real effort to like re-regulate, like self-regulate.
It's a little stressful. I don't know. To anyone who doesn't have a kid, I don't know if you know this, but it could be a little stressful sometimes. So, just a word of warning.
Now,
There's it's actually more stressful than fun, I think, at the start. For me. I don't know. I think that. Tell me if that's bad advice.
what's more stressful of this? But what's the stress? Can I clarify? Is it the kid or is it
I'm gonna
like
drink this non-alcoholic beer, but now I wish I brought an alcoholic beer.
what's the non-alcoholic beer that you?
I bought it was on sale at the grocery store, and I was actually like taken by it's like 30 calories per can. And I was like, that's very little.
You still haven't told me what it is.
What do you mean? What is it? It's non-alcoholic
Is it
beer.
a
It's
brand?
this. No, it's Selection brand. That's
Oh
the food.
wow, it's like Metro.
It's
Metro
like
brand.
actually not that good. I'm gonna be honest, but I
Huh.
bought 12 of them for some reason.
Oh,
So-
that was great. Well, does it come in a box of 12?
It was a box of 12.
Okay.
It was on sale. It was like $7. So
Okay. So that's the price of like you got 12 non-alcoholic beers for less than the cost of a single beer.
right.
Ouch.
But I mean, I'm not complaining about like that I think I wasted my money. It's more like now I have them. So I figure I need to drink it. So I brought it up that I was going to drink it during the podcast. But now after this experience, I kind of wish I just had a real beer to like calm the nerves a little bit. But
You could go get one.
no. Okay, Brian, you don't understand. I'm upstairs.
There's
Noah's-
zero disturbances. You're
Yeah, it's
you're-
like she's
you're
on the way
locking
to
it
the
down.
kitchen. So I
Yeah.
would be like taking a big risk clomping up and down the stairs.
Clomping,
So I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going
clip
anywhere.
clopping.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be a horse. Anyway, I think we're ready to go now. There's 2 people here now. So it's
I
probably better
have,
that we waited. That's better to record with an audience of 2.
You know, the Corona non-alcoholic beer.
The virus. Oh,
No.
yeah.
No, what's amazing, I actually realized this recently, that Corona did not pivot. They kept the name. I don't even think they forcefully or like tried to counter any
What
of
are they
it.
going to do? Like, and everyone knows
They didn't do,
it's
you know
like
what? They
a-
didn't do anything. They've come up
That's
on
a
they
smart
come
choice,
like I
yeah.
ordered a Corona the other night
I like it.
and I didn't even think of the virus.
Did I tell you about how like one of the first things Dina told me when I told? Did you know the story? I think I mentioned maybe on the Patreon cast or something at some point. Dina's thoughts on Corona and people who drink it.
No.
She thinks it's a not. Well, this is not how she feels now, I'm sure. But like when I first met her and she was like 18, she thought it was like not a manly drink.
Oh.
Like she was like not impressed with me when I ordered a Corona.
So have you stopped?
No, I like it.
Like I actually like I think it's like I think I'm leaning into my Corona phase like right now. It's like it's light, it's easy, it's breezy, comes with a lime. You get a little show
depends on-
when you push the lime into the bottle.
That's fun. That's fun.
It's like I don't want a tall can either. Like it's one of like the
bottle.
better
You want the
widely
bottle.
available bottled beers, I think. And Hey, and if you think that makes me square, then that's
That wasn't the word she used. Also, she did,
unmanly, feminine.
well, that wasn't the word she used either. I can't say the word because you would make me edit it. But-
You know what? If that makes me that, then I am no. Then I'm not that. Then they're. I mean, whatever. I don't care. So
well, I
I
think she's come around on. To
but
it
I
a
was
little
having
bit.
the
It is
non-alcoholic. So
tasty.
I can't wait to hear what she says about someone who has the non-alcoholic version.
Oh God. Well, I've been having this non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah,
I think
but it's
she's
not
just
a
kinda like-
non-alcoholic Corona.
Right. Well,
So I but on the bottle of the non-alcoholic version, it says don't consume more than 2.
so stupid. Maybe they're just being like too much. Like, you don't need to hydrate that much. It's like, why are you drinking?
Well, actually, so this conversation started because I'm like, okay, well, regular beer is dehydrating, and like, I could have a glass of water or non-alcoholic beer. Would non-alcoholic beer also dehydrate? Like, am I going to lose ground, or am I just going to stay at least level? Anyway, but I don't know why it says that, and like the irony is that it. So the best theory I've heard is that if it has trace amounts of alcohol and you're drinking non-alcoholic beer to avoid alcohol, like you might be in trouble if you have more than 2. But the funny thing is it doesn't say that on the regular beer. Like you'd think on an alcoholic beverage, it might say do not consume more than 2.
Yeah, because actually it does say here contains less than 0.5% of alcohol. So it doesn't say 0.
Oh,
So-
well, the Corona one is 0.0. There is a
Oh.
difference. There's like there's low, there's less than 0.5, and there's 0.0. I've done a little bit of research
Look
over
at
the
you.
last week since I did this.
Maybe
But if
we should
anyone
pivot
knows
the
why
podcast.
what will happen if I consume more than 2 Corona Sun brews in
I'll
one
be curious to
sitting.
know as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Brian, you should just, for science, you should just do it. I think you should drink.
I'm
3
not
Corona
gonna.
Sun.
You,
Come on, we all wanna
can I
know.
task rabbit that? Can I pay
You
some?
can't trust. Like, I want to know how it affects you.
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe at a next Patreon live event, where you can entertain us.
You
with
know
that.
what? I'll have 2, and then we'll all watch as I take a sip of the 3rd.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's start. This is probably the worst ever 20 minutes of a YouTube video that's ever been published.
Oh, you're underestimating YouTube.
All right. Let's do this. Let's see if I can remember my joke at this point. Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Carlson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, who unfortunately can't do anything to help replace Cap Friendly, but we can do our best to put out a friendly podcast episode, no cap. I'm your host, Dylan Dabrowski, and with me, ready to break down the second half of my spreadsheet, the sadder half. Unless you're think that just strong starts are what makes you happy, but I guess the sadder half because of the Red Boys, the players who fell off a cliff in the second half of the season. It is my very good friend, the fantasy hockey robot, the poobah of prognostication himself, the fantasy hockey robot, Brian Com. Brian, how's it going?
I'm okay. I'm actually feeling uncomfortably close to being called the sadder half of the podcast from that intro. One moment it felt like it was going to be me, and then you moved back towards the content, but then it came back to me. So
I definitely didn't mean that you're a sad part of the podcast. You bring the joy.
speaking of sadder halves, my friend and yours, Brian Com.
But you are the sadder half today because I saw how disappointed you are about Cap Friendly just being announced that they're going to get purchased by the Washington Capitals,
Yeah.
and that's going to go dark.
I'm very
Important
upset.
website.
I'm very upset. It's been a long time since we lost a site. And Elon, I remember way back, way back, when we were just starting the podcast, I relied heavily on a little site called Extra Skater, which has since gone dark. And I think, if I'm remembering right, most of the staff were hired on by the Leafs. But there was a moment where we were doing the podcast and I was using that to get my advanced statistics. And it doesn't even compare to what we have today, but it was the best we had, and it was really novel and exciting. And then it was like, well, how are we going to keep we started the podcast to talk about new statistics, and then the new statistics became unavailable, but very briefly, because then War on Ice popped up. That was the next big thing. There was another one. It was like the precursor to Corsica, or it was Corsica. Anyway, we could take a trip back in time, but really this is a feeling that we haven't had for a while. I feel like the sites that were in the public sphere for the last few years were like there to stay. And like the era of starting a site, getting bought out, shutting down your site had passed us. But it hasn't. And the cap friendly rug's been pulled out from under us. And I'm trying to think, Elon, of what the Capitals are accomplishing here. And I think what they're doing is, I don't know that they're necessarily gaining anything, but they are depriving the other 31 teams of accessing all that cap friendly has to offer, which I think is a pretty cold move. I think it's a very competitive move.
I wonder how. Your guess, like there's more to it that we don't know, like more that the cap friendly team is like
is willing to do
part of the purchase.
Sure, but like I think that's one of the, because I remember way back when the bloggers were starting to get picked off one by one, like the strange condition, or it felt strange at the time, was you have to take everything down. Like nobody else can access anything you've written. Everything you've put and published now belongs to us or can't be shared. And so because it was like, we want that information. We don't want our opponents to have it. So I really hope Puckpedia, seems to be stepping up and ready to go. But man, Cap Friendly just kept adding features, and like I'm going to miss so much about the website. So much. Like it became a real necessary and needed resource and like a hotkey for me. So there might be moments over the next little while and even into next season where I'm looking for certain information on the fly, and you're just going to have to bear with me a little bit more.
Well, that's only to the live listeners. I'll be the one bearing the brunt of it as the editor of the show, making it seem as if you came up with it exactly on the fly, but we'll do our best. And yeah, so I checked out Puckpedia today. I look up Nathan McKinnon, a guy who, by the way, I just recently traded for in my Dynasty League, which I'm super stoked about. And I see he makes $12.6 million. He's on year 2 of 8. That's already a decent amount of info. I know it's like scratching the surface. There's more here, so maybe we'll be okay. But yeah, it is pretty wild that Cap Friendly is going to go away. But before we get to that point in our lives, because the news is that they're apparently going to stay live at least through the draft and the UFA day, the trades being available to be made, and like the first free agents. So we'll have that for at least maybe, our main because we're going to do a big episode in the summer, right? Where we're going to talk about all the free agents. It's going to be amazing. It's probably going to be like 3 or 4 episodes. So hopefully we'll still have Cap Friendly for that, because that'll be handy. And then they can go and we'll learn to love a new friend here in Puckpedia. Not I don't mean to make a paid ad for Puckpedia or whoever. Right now that seems to be the front runner for who I'm going to use.
I'll give them a free ad. Like whatever. I mean, I knew how valuable Cap Friendly was to me, and I really appreciated them, and we credited them on the show. I'm happy to tell people how helpful tools are.
Well, we're going to figure it out as we go. But for today, like I said, I've built my own tool on Google Sheets. I guess Google Sheets was the tool I used to make this, which was a spreadsheet of all the players splitting up their seasons, the first half up to January 11th, and then after January 11th. And I made a little column where I see a percentage difference of their point pace before and after. And today we're going to be looking at players who were much better in the first half and try to parse out what changed, what happened, because we're trying to come up with our projections for next year. You look at their total for the season and look, Jeff Skinner's a 51-point player, but it's like that doesn't really tell the whole story. He was a 70-point player half the way. There was a 30-point guy, so I feel like we need to really dive into some of these players to try to understand what we can expect. So that's the plan for today. We are proudly presented by DobberHockey.com. Hopefully no NHL team will buy that. I mean, that'd be great for, I'm sure, Dobber and his team. I guess I don't know if they make a lot. I don't want to wish them to not have a big windfall, sure, but I would be disappointed if that site went dark. Of course, Frozen Tools, which I use to prep the show, it's amazing. So for now, available to all, DobberHockey.com. Check it out. Brian, I guess let's get started here. So if I take my spreadsheet, right at the top, the player, I had some like conditions here. I'm not sure if that changed it. So I'm only looking at players who had at least, a 40-point pace. Yeah, 40-point pace total on the season. So we're not looking at the real like nobodies. And also they have to have played at least 30 games in each of the halves. The player at the top of the list with the biggest drop off from the Vancouver Canucks, Filip Hronek. And I'm sure a lot of these players I'll bring up, there's going to be a lot of people listening being like, oh, yeah, you don't have to tell me. Anyone who had Filip Hronek in their league is like knows what I'm talking about, because he went from like a stud. Hopefully no one like traded for him. Hopefully if we go back on the podcast, there wasn't too much Filip Hronek talk in the first half of us saying this is totally for real and sustainable, because he had 36 points in 42 games to start the year, 70-point pace. And then for the rest of the season, like totally fantasy irrelevant, like just a drain on your team. 12 points in 39 games. That's a 25-point pace. The only reason you were holding him was because you were praying that he'll go back to what he did in the first half, and it never happened. I'm going to have a few other Canucks on this list. So I wonder, Brian, if this was a team thing, because like a little bit further down, I see Elias Pettersson is on this list. Brock Besser is on this list. So we can start with Hronek and then maybe bleed into those other guys. But what the heck? What the heck happened? And actually, we talked about this in the last show, how there was an interview, and an interviewer asked him, like, were you injured? And he was like, no, and he was really annoyed. So I feel like we've already talked about him a little bit, but being at the top of the list, we got to at least dive in one more time.
That's so embarrassing. It's like those days where I'm like at work and I'm just like walking down the hall and someone's like, "Oh, you look tired." I'm like, "What?" Like, I'm fine. Like, now I'm worried about how I look, or like how I'm like, do I seem like I'm not at my best? Because
right,
I think I'm trying my hardest today.
Well, with Hronek, I think he realized that he was not getting the same results.
He just didn't want to talk about it. I actually did go back and check out the Cacupful trade history from this year. He was traded 3 times. Would you like to hear the trades?
Sure. And do you have the dates also?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was traded twice within 10 days in early December. So December 5th, Hronek...
He was crushing it at that point. He was like a stud at this point.
He was, yeah. I mean, yes, he was. I mean,
like
you know what?
Mid-December, I'm seeing like just assists every single game, looking at the game log.
Okay.
Just to give the context of when he was traded. Okay.
So he was traded with William Nylander for John Carlson and Matthew Tkachuk. So like overall, okay. Like that doesn't.
Nylander's on this list also. So the person who got Tkachuk... Maybe, but I mean, Nylander still had a good stretch after. I'll call that a wash.
Well, someone sold high on Hronek and Nylander to some extent.
Matthew Tkachuk really was amazing at the end.
The better side of Tkachuk, and like Carlson wasn't fantastic, but he was better than Hronek. Okay, 10 days later, Filip Hronek was traded for Jared McCann.
McCann was
a Green Boy.
If you recall, he was really great in the second half. So that was a huge win.
There's a Red Boy for a Green Boy deal. All right.
Yikes.
And then in late February, this seems like a nothing trade. Filip Hronek for Trevor Moore.
This was at a point where the person who had Filip Hronek was probably like, Hronek's on the block, and then in their head, they were thinking, if no one takes him, I'm dropping him. And then someone reached out with the trade for Trevor Moore, like, oh, I'll take anything.
Right.
Okay.
Or there was like Fab included. Okay.
Yeah, or maybe there was a schedule. Maybe it was just like Vancouver played 4 times next week, and that made him appealing. So, which turned out not to be, because even if he plays 10 games,
yeah.
All right.
Well, we talked about Hronek a couple times, or a handful of times through the year, and I remember early on it was like there was enough unknown to be like, could Filip Hronek keep this up to some extent? Like, can he break out of the 40-point mold that we've seen him in? For essentially his career, always believing that Hronek had more upside, but now Hronek was with a new team in Vancouver. Things were working out really well. The whole squad was clicking. And so the question was, could he do well? But we saw some really clear signs of regression from the outset. And he started, by the way, with 15 points in his first 14 games, 5 power play points in there. And power play points were definitely a theme through the first quarter of the season. Hronek had put up 8 power play points in 22 games. That's a 31-point full season pace on the power play, but that was from the second unit, which is not something that's at all sustainable. So after 8 points in his first 22, Hronek played 60 more games and had 3 power play points. So 1 every 20 games, which is, still actually low for power play too, but that's what it was. His on-ice shooting percentage was also high early on. It was sitting at 16% at 5-on-5, and predictably it dropped, but it dropped all the way down to 7%, which is like a lot. Like, that's a lot. Like, maybe it could have stayed at 8 or 9, but still, it was way too high, and 7% is much closer to true value that we'd expect. And basically, Hronik at 5-on-5, his points per 60 were cut in half. Anyway, there it is. It was just like this crazy power play run at the start of the year, and also some amazing shooting success from his line mates while he was on the ice. Both of those things predictably went poof, and then he was left with a 25-point pace through the back half. Should he have done better than that pace? Like, I think so. By much? I don't know. Hronik's at age 27 next year, and what I'm happy to do for him is I'm going to set him right back to that 40-point expectation that he's been at for most of his career, and hope that he can get that far.
I think that's reasonable. And hey, here's one thing I can throw at you that maybe contributed at least a little bit beyond what you've said. Elias Pettersson, like I said, is on this list. He had a 111-point pace in the first half, and then only a 66-point pace in the second half. So you've got to think with Pettersson not being as good, that kind of hurts anyone who's on the ice with him. And I'm seeing, like, after the season, the news came out. Here's a tweet from Brendan Batchelor. I'm looking at, very easy, by the way. Search another tool that I guess if an NHL team wanted to buy out game day tweets from us, we'll listen. But right now, that's available publicly. And I searched for Pettersson, and I see a tweet here where he said that he's been playing with a bad knee since January. So, which exactly aligns with, like, would have been nice, by the way, if Pettersson informed his fantasy managers in January that he was starting to have a bad knee, because that's a huge fall off, right? Almost like 111-point pace to 66 is like going from like a stud to like, yeah, fine, nothing special. But I'd imagine, just to say back to Hronik, like maybe when Pettersson falls off and has a bad knee, that's not going to be great for the defenseman that's playing big minutes with him, right?
No, but I think that's also still not really, like, it wasn't all Pettersson, and Besser's on this list too. But like, I just want to go back, like that power play production was really, really unsustainable at the start, and that had nothing to do with Pettersson and Besser. And even, and Pettersson, like whoever was on the ice, and I think Besser was on the ice with Hronik plenty at the start of the year, like they were all overachieving in their shooting too. So, do you want to jump to Pettersson now, since...
Let's do Pettersson. I already gave the stats, and I'll throw out Besser's number 2, so then you could just knock it all out.
All right.
So Pettersson, like I said, 111 pace in the first half, 66 in the second half. Brock Besser, 90-point pace in the first half of the season, 46 points in 42 games. Second half, only a 57-point pace, 27 points in 39. So yeah, all three of these Canucks went from huge studs to, with Hronik nothing, and the other two just kind of like, meh, fine. Oh, they're okay.
Yeah. So Pettersson, I mean, you pretty much just covered, right? He was injured, knee thing, tendinitis, I think was what I saw, since January. And that really basically coincides with the Pettersson's 5-on-5 production basically getting cut in half on a per 60 basis. He had a harder time putting shots on goal, and the shots he did put on net didn't seem as threatening as they had been in the first half. And, like, it doesn't necessarily explain all of it, because in the back half of the season, there's a lot of people playing hurt. And like, so I don't know if Pettersson was more hurt than usual. But, I think this is all there really is to see here, though. Like, I'm still a believer in Elias Pettersson. I'm not concerned about his red boy status. I'm going to
Sorry, then just to interrupt then, because I think this is a good opportunity then, potentially. Like, if you're in a dynasty keeper league, maybe this is a great time to trade for Pettersson. Like, if people are looking at him as just, he ended the season with 89 points, right? So people are seeing him as that. And if we're going to kind of write off that whole second half, being like, he was injured, whatever, like, I mean, I'm not saying to do this, but I'm saying if you're of the mindset, like Brian, sounds like you're saying, that like you're just going to write off that second half because he was injured, then if people aren't valuing him as an 111-point guy anymore, think about it. And in drafts next year also, I'll bet you he's not going to be taken in the first round of a couple drafts like he was last year. So maybe someone's going to have a really sweet turn, if it's a snake draft, we have 14 teams. Let's say you get someone great at like 12 and then you get Pettersson at 16. That could be a really great start.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his early numbers from the season, and like they were like a touch inflated, thanks to like some friendly percentages. But on the whole, I actually don't think it would, like the 110-point pace, not crazy. Not out of the realm of possibility of like keeping up. So for that reason, I would be okay. Like, you know what? Sorry, I should say not out of the realm of possibility of that like being a realistic upside. I think 100 points is still more realistic, just because like Like I said, his line was shooting really well to start the season. He was shooting like 16 or 17%, but he's generally a pretty highly efficient converter, around 15%. So yeah, I think I'd still have Pettersson around 100 points. I'm not like just going to split the difference here and go with the 90-point pace that falls between his first and second half. So yeah, there could be value there for Elias Pettersson. And then for Brock Besser, I just need to find him in my notes. There he is. He also saw his 5-on-5 production cut in half. That's going to be a theme through this episode. Like it's a nice like clean cut for a lot of these guys. There were two culprits for Besser. The first is that his points participation rate fell 20%, which was random and it shouldn't have happened. Like sometimes it's because it was too high. It wasn't. It was like right where it should have been, and it fell to like where a high-end defenseman would be instead of a high-end forward. So that's one reason that Besser lost some points in the second half, was this bad variance there. Also, though, there was some reasonable regression in Besser's shooting percentage. He was shooting 21% through the first half of the season, and then he shot 10% in the back half, which is really basically his usual shooting percentage. He also saw some drop in his on-ice shooting percentage. That was fueled somewhat by his own shooting loss, as well as those on the ice with him, who we've already kind of covered. But one promising thing is, even while his shooting percentage dropped, Besser's 5-on-5 like expected goals, like his threat, actually grew in the second half. So that's to say, like, hey, the second half points wise didn't look fantastic, but really it was expected regression, unfair regression, and all the while under the hood things were actually looking better for Besser. This isn't to say 90 points is where Besser belongs. I think that was flying high for him, but the 57-point second half for Besser, too low because of bad variance. So I think 70 points is probably a good expectation for Besser in his age 20.
He ended the season with 74.
Yeah,
so
I know. Well,
basically that.
Yeah. But note that I'm going even just a titch below it, just to be safe. I would like to believe age 27 for Besser next season. I'd like to believe the over 70 is more likely than the under on 70. So I think 74 points is absolutely possible. But I think when I'm drafting him, I'm thinking low end of 70, knowing there's upside for more. And I don't think, a lot of us might be really excited about the 40 goals and that we're going to see a repeat, but I'm going to refer to the fact that he was shooting 20% for half a season and say I don't expect that to happen again. So I'd be happy to see Besser hit 30 goals, which he did pretty reliably in 3 of his first 4 full seasons in the league. And it would be nice for him to do that reliably once again. Like, I think that's enough of a win. We don't need to get greedy with Brock Besser.
Sure. And also keep in mind that before this season, he had a couple years where he was like getting bumped from the top power play, and like his deployment was once in a while like going even to the bottom 6. Like this season, he was right back, like top 6, either with Pettersson or with like a JT Miller and on the top power play. So you definitely don't want to decrease him too much, assuming that we're excited for Pettersson to come back and be his great self. Then, Besser should be with him. Or if he's playing with JT Miller. JT Miller, by the way, is also a red boy. He's just like so far down the list, but he also, like, I guess a lot of Canucks did, but Miller, like, very impressive that he was able to go from, like, Miller had 113-point pace in the first half and then fell to 95 in the second half. So still like playing like an elite player. Even though he decreased. So he's awesome. Quinn Hughes also, by the way, a red boy. So I guess all the Canucks kind of slowed down a little bit in the second half.
There is a theme of teammates in this episode. And I think like there were a couple in the first episode too, like Minnesota showed up in a few different places. And I think actually the teammate vibe here is even stronger. So yeah, right. I mean, that's how it goes, right? If on-ice shooting percentage goes down, it's going to hurt everybody who's on the ice.
Makes a lot of sense. Brian, that was a great analysis of those 3 guys. Now, I'm starting to feel it. Like, I'm not even joking around. Like, I feel like now if teams are trying to buy out different people, like, that was a really succinct, great way of going through so much data to give us a full analysis on these players. Like,
wow.
I got to get you under a tighter contract.
I'm very suspicious of what you're talking. Is this because I asked like in the pre-show, like how much longer do you think we can continue? Are you I also but I also appreciate you saying that, because I have to say the Red and Green Boys is like a different style of prep than I do for most shows. Like I have more windows. Like there's a lot more like it's a lot more labor to be honest.
But
And
it's
it's like,
I
and
love
it's
it.
these June episodes where our listenership is probably at its lowest. But I hope people are coming back to it as draft season comes. So it's very validating, Elon, to know that the episodes that I am actually spending more time prepping with fewer listeners are at least for those few. Hey, they deserve it. You know what? They deserve it. You
I think
deserve it.
this is vintage Brian. Like this is like back when we started the show, you were doing these like super deep dives. I think at one point I was even like, maybe you could dial back a little
You
bit. Like we got a lot of
definitely-
players.
yeah.
We got a lot of players to get through here. But for the summer, like go nuts, and that was fun. Okay, but let's keep going down this list here. So I don't really think there's much to dive into with our second red boy here. Just again, I'm looking at just the largest percentage difference. Sean Couturier, if we all recall, he was like coming back from not playing for what was it, 1 year, 2 years, but he came back, had a great start, and then totally disappeared in the second half, including getting benched a bunch of times. So I think this would just come down to like ice time and maybe like there's a chicken and egg. Like probably he got less ice time because Tortorella hated what he was seeing from him. But anyways, whatever. You're not going to be drafting Sean Couturier next year. I can't imagine. Maybe last round pick.
No, as somebody who continues to draft Sean Couturier every year is like a really late grab and like basically a free pick, a free 70-point player at the end or upside for that. I do not plan to do it this year. Like I think I'm over it.
And another guy who you've been into, and I mentioned him at the top, Jeff Skinner. Okay, we got to dive into him because I don't really get it. Like I know right at the end his deployment ended up changing because how could they not change things around with how little he was doing? But how did Jeff Skinner go from being a 71-point player in the first half? And don't forget, for context, Skinner was coming off 82-point season, right? So in 2022-23, Skinner crushed it. 82 points in 79 games. Was playing with Tage Thompson, right? Was like and another guy, Sam Reinhart? No. What was it? What was the Tuck, of course.
Alex
Tuck. Sorry.
Tuck.
While Brian's in like his vintage, like peak summer mode, I'm like, who's on that line? But anyway, this year, Skinner started off just the way he ended the previous year. Was looking like a great draft pick for anyone who wasn't believing in it. Like I said, 70-point pace. If you look at the start of the season, even before my January 11 cutoff, he was looking. Well, actually, he was looking really good, actually, right up to there, pretty much. I see he missed a couple of games, January 11th and January 13th. I wonder if that was a moment where some injury happened or something, because after that, when he came back from missing those 2 games, a different guy, useless in fantasy, like Hronek. We're talking 13 points in 36 games, a 30-point pace. Do you have any Jeff Skinner trades? I know you said you brought up the Hronek trades. I'd love to know if there was any Skinners, because that was another, like, just... And I'll bet you people paid a lot more because I feel like a lot of people were like, okay, come on, he's Filip Hronek. But Skinner had just come off a point-per-game season, had a killer first half. This is a weird one to me. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything on Game Day News here. Maybe Skinner was injured also.
No.
I don't
This
think
is
so.
actually very easy, Elon. And I think you're just in your summer mode. You're just forgetting. Like Skinner's deployment changed completely. Like that.
But why?
I don't know.
And will
Okay.
it happen again? So there's still something to think.
That's the big question. And you asked about trades, so let me start with that. We had in early December, Jeff Skinner was traded. Jeff Skinner and Sean Dursey, 2 Red Boys, traded for Martin Necas and Brady Shea. So I'd say the Carolina side of that deal came out pretty well. There was another trade involving Jeff Skinner. There are a lot of pieces here. Tell me if you can parse this. Mid-December, it was Rasmus Anderson, Jeff Skinner, and Jacob Markstrom for Dylan Cousins, Johnny Gaudreau, and Miro Heiskanen.
This was a big loss because
for like everyone.
well, no, like Heiskanen.
Heiskanen is the one player of value of these 6.
Because Rasmus Anderson was looking good, and then he got bumped in the second half, if you recall, and he wasn't even on the top power play at the end of the year. So, yeah, I think that if you traded away Skinner and Rasmus Anderson, that was like a really, savvy play, I guess.
Yeah.
And going into next year, I think
you
it's
got
over.
Gaudreau and Gaudreau wasn't much help.
He did okay, but yeah, he wasn't amazing for sure. We talked about him a bit on the last show, but yeah, Mackenzie Weegar. By the way, as a side note, I think he's going to be one of these guys that is going to fall too far. He's going to be so good next year. Now that he's taken top power play, I don't know. That's my hunch.
I know that's a side note. That's a front and center note every time he's tangentially brought up.
So like, this is the last chance, maybe, or maybe this is going to be a Jeff Petrie situation, where he had this one amazing year and then totally disappears again. But like, I don't know. I feel like Mackenzie Weegar, people are going to be too. You're not going to take him amongst like the top guys. Even though if you look at a couple average points per game, he was right there. So that's going to be an interesting one. But anyway, we're talking about Jeff Skinner.
There was
All right, so
also
you're saying
a
it was just the
Jeff
deployment changed.
Jeff Skinner for Nick Schmaltz in late February, straight up. Which, that was hopeful because at
What
that
did
point,
Schmaltz do in the second half? Schmaltz had a great second half, 35 points in 39 games. That was
well,
a
and also
clear
this
win.
is like the last quarter of the season, which
I
was
see.
also Jeff Skinner's absolute worst, and that's saying something. And again, like we don't need to get fancy here. This is all deployment for why Jeff Skinner had a crap second half. Whoa, that's a stronger word than I usually use. But
Please don't ask me to edit.
this is I won't. This has been the Jeff Skinner story in Buffalo before, though. Remember when he got there and he was getting paid and then buried in its bottom six and couldn't do anything, and then he got lifted up to the top line, crushed it, and then this year for about a year and a half, and then this year we saw Skinner lose deployment again. And one of the ways we saw it happen was first quarter, full power play one. Second quarter, he was on the top unit most of the time. Third quarter, it was occasionally Jeff Skinner on the top unit. Fourth quarter, he did not even, he barely set foot if he did it all on the top unit. And if you remember, going back to the first quarter of the season when Skinner was on that top power play full time, that power play wasn't even clicking. They weren't even doing well. All this adds up to just 12 power play points for Jeff Skinner all year compared to 21 that he had the year prior. And on top of all this power play demotion, Jeff Skinner was demoted to the third line in the fourth quarter of the season at 5-on-5. And that even came post Casey Middlestat trade, right? So a piece of the top six left, and Jeff Skinner was still on the team and did not play in the top six. Can he get back there? Who knows? Honestly, you've got
New coach.
New old coach. You've got Jack Quinn. You've got JJ Paterka. They can plug themselves into the top six just fine, it seems. You got Zach Benson on the come up too. And Skinner looked, it's hard to know if he was worse or his line was worse. Both could have been true. His individual numbers went down. His on ice numbers went down. I don't know how much of that was him and how much of that was circumstance. But he's heading into his age 32 season, and big buyer beware on Jeff Skinner. I'd be open to considering him later in my draft if in camp he's on the top unit and playing in the top six. But even if in camp he's doing that, I'm really still not wanting to burn any real draft capital on Jeff Skinner without having a real guarantee of locked in solid deployment. I would be happy to basically let him go to free agency, and then early in the season, if I see him get a turn, I'll try and add him onto my roster and see if he lasts. But I mean, he's getting paid too much to not be getting that role. So
But at this point, the Sabres need to go for it now. They don't have time to it's like these teams with a goalie, or sometimes it's they're paying their goalie so much, they're going to play him and try to get him right. But the Sabres just need to go with the players that are going to help them finally get into the playoffs, because they were supposed to get in already. And like you said, that was a really good point you said, Brian. They have a good top six of I'm just going to name players, but Thompson, Cousins, Tuck, Jack Quinn, Paterka, whatever, Peyton Krebs. You've already got a top six potentially. You don't need Skinner there. You could have Skinner in a bottom six. So it's not as if he's got a guaranteed spot for sure.
He's making $9 million for
insane.
3. Well, that's his cap hit is $9 million. He's making 10 and then 7 and then 5 in salary. Thanks, cap friendly, by the way. But the cap hit is huge. It's wild that Jeff Skinner has 3 years left and a $9 million cap hit and could get buried in the bottom six. Oh, and a full no movement clause.
Yeah. I don't think it's not like anyone would take him anyways. But so I agree with you. I think if we were obviously there's so much nuance here, but if we were just having to do a binary, a stamp on each player, which is the more going into next year's draft, which side am I believing in more? For Skinner is definitely, I agree, the second half. I also would not be using a high pick on him, too risky. For sure. Maybe he can go on a great run and you'll end up getting great value for a late pick, but that's where he belongs for sure. All right, next up here. So I've got Cole Perfetti. I don't think we need to dive into him too much. He was pacing for 58 points, which was solid. He was having a good first half. He fell off in the second half. His deployment really went away. I think it's again kind of like the same story with Skinner as with Perfetti. But of course, while Skinner is, losing ground to the young players, like Perfetti is the exciting young player. So I think, and there's going to be a new coach. So I feel like it's really hard to just say. It's like, depends. Like he's going to have to prove in training camp to the new, has Winnipeg signed a new coach yet? I don't even remember. But,
oh yeah, it's Scott Arniel, isn't it?
Winnipeg Jets coach. Googling it. Scott Arniel. Look at you. But look,
Yes.
Brian is in postseason.
Look at that.
If only you could play Cupful in the off season.
Oh, I would crush a couple in the off season. It's like reminds me of like if I could play Little League now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Perfetti, I just think like probably he's like I'd say my opinion is he's almost definitely better than the 25-point pace he put up in the second half. Obviously, it's just up to Scott Arniel to give him the opportunity. He's a high pedigree guy. He showed in the first half he can do it. I don't know if it's worth like getting your expertise to dive in. The guy I really wanted to get you to dive into next is the next on the list here from your Ottawa Senators, Jakob Chychrun. And I remember going into the season, I was like really excited to draft Chychrun because he's coming off like a weird season where he got traded midway through and he was being held out of a bunch of games because Arizona didn't want him to get injured before he finally got traded to the Sens. And then he came in and was like such a hit. And I remember I wanted to draft him, then I didn't get him. I got like sniped on him or something like right before I was going to pick him. I don't remember the exact circumstance, but he like came out really strong. He had a 58-point pace through the first half of the year, which is really good for a defenseman. Plus, like the peripherals that he brings. Like if you look at his game log, he had like a 9-shot game in there. Like a lot of big shot games. He also has a lot of blocks, which is great. So it was like really solid. And then unfortunately, as all these Red boys are going to be, I'm just going to tell the same story over and over again this whole time. Chychrun disappeared in the second half. Only a 27-point pace in his final 45-point games. 15 points in 45 games. Not rosterable, even with the peripherals. So next year, like he's still on the Sens for now. I know that he could potentially get traded because he only has 1 year left before becoming a UFA. But it's like they'd probably not get as much for him right now after what we've seen. So Brian, which is the real Jakob Chychrun? Because this guy was supposed to be a huge like superstar. And that was a very surprising fall off to me anyways.
I mean, yeah, you were really high on him going into the year, and I was very afraid of him going into the year because we just didn't know how things were going to shake out in Ottawa. And I feel like we didn't get any kind of real closure on that. And Chychrun's status is like pretty up in the air too going forward. He was rumored to be available at the deadline, and who knows if he's still available in the off season. But Chychrun is somebody who I felt very wrong about having avoided in drafts in the first part of the season and then felt vindicated on the back half. And it's actually a very similar story for Chychrun to Filip Hronek, which is that from the second unit in Ottawa, which was like at times like a 1B, but still he was generally under a 50% share, Chychrun. He had a 27 power play point pace through just more than the first quarter, 9 power play points in his first 27 games. And then in Chychrun's next 42 games, he had a total of 3 power play points. And then he tacked on 4 more power play points in the last couple of weeks, thanks to some top unit time that Chychrun finally saw. But he didn't even hold that till the rest of the year. Chychrun finished the season with 4 consecutive games on the second power play unit. So basically, a lot of scoring from a place where he shouldn't have been scoring. And then the scoring dried up, even worse than expected. And that top unit opportunity still never really came to be for Jakob Chychrun. And also at 5-on-5, his point rates were cut in half. Word of the episode, a phrase of the episode. His shooting dropped from 9% to 2%. His points participation dropped from 40% to 30%. His on-ice shooting percentage dropped from 10% to 5%. At least Chychrun was shooting more in the second half. And some of that variance is like bad and unfair. And some of it is like, like it might have been a little high in the first place. So, you splitting the difference. Chychrun's at 41 points for the whole season last year. I'm going to take the over. I have more faith in Chychrun than I do Hronek, since I think even with second power play, or if they do like a 1B situation somehow in Ottawa, Chychrun can do better at 5-on-5 than he did this year, regardless of the power play situation too. And also new coach. we'll see how Chychrun, like that might help Chychrun. He's carrying some baggage. We'll see how he responds to that. I'd be looking at Chychrun though as like maybe my third defenseman, but we'll also just have to keep an eye on Ottawa and see what happens in the offseason and what moves they make, because it feels like they might not sit still. So we'll wait and see. But Chychrun is definitely the third Ottawa Senators defenseman I'm interested in at the moment, behind Shabbat and Sanderson, even though I don't think he's like in a completely other tier than they are. Like he might be in the same tier or like a half a tier drop. Still, it's just a risk that I'm not crazy about taking, because I want him if he's on the top power play. And if he's not, then I could probably leave him.
Yeah, and it's like if he does get traded in the offseason, it's going to be so tricky. Like we'll just have the same convo because it'll just be like, is he going to go on the top power play? Like we thought he was a lock to be on the top power play in Arizona at the end there. And then if you recall, like Shane Gostisbehere was PP1 and it was like, what? Why? Why did this happen? So I feel like you can't bank on it. No matter where Chychrun gets traded, if it happens, I'm not coming on the podcast and saying like, well, now he's got PP1. It's set, because I just, you can't be sure. I feel like when players go to new teams, you can't, and like you said, here we don't even know where he's going to be on his current team. Let's go to another young player, a la a Cole Perfetti, that I wanted to talk about. Mason McTavish was a guy who was looking like one of the steals of fantasy drafts going into the year, like super young. He's only, what is Mason McTavish now? Like he's 21 years old now. Turned that in January. So he was 20 years old at the time that people were drafting him. And he came out of the gate super strong. Like my spreadsheet shows him as being at a 65-point pace through the first half. He missed some time with injury. So 27 points in 34 games. If you go to just like 20 games, he had like 21 points in his first 20 games. Like Mason McTavish came out of the chute like just blazing and then really tapered off. And I wonder here if this is going to be a case where he also, like we know he was dealing with injury. He missed a lot of time in the second half of the season. He barely makes the cut here. He played 30 games. What was my threshold again? 30 games. Great. Yeah, so if he would have missed one more game, he wouldn't have even been on the spreadsheet. But yeah, he played 30 games in the second half and only had a 41-point pace. But clearly he was like coming in and out of the lineup. I don't know. I think this is like going to be a great steal for drafts next year. Because if people are drafting him as a 54-point pace guy, like he ended up being in his 64 games, 42 points in 64 games, I feel like he's young. He's like the leader of this team. I guess there's the Ducks factor, which is always a problem that you never know what's going to happen. And I remember I was really stoked about Troy Terry because of the great schedule and how great he looked. And then he had a really rough start. So it's no guarantees, but anyways, I'm giving my answer right away, but I'm curious, obviously, to hear your analysis or whatever you can and analyze for a guy who was injured so much. But I'm pretty excited about Mason McTavish. I think he's one of those red boys that, unlike a Jeff Skinner, I think is like this is a potential gift if you go and grab him a little earlier than others.
So one thing that was interesting to me about Mason McTavish was that even on such a thin Ducks team, he was not getting like regular top power play time. Like it was on and off through the year, more often off. He wasn't doing anything on either unit. He had one power play point in his last 31 games. That's one of the reasons that McTavish only pays for 41 points in the back half of the season. But at 5-on-5, we also saw McTavish only take half as many shots as he had in the first half. And that's really the difference. He shot actually to the decimal the same in the samples I took, 14.6%. But when you take half as many shots, that's basically the difference, right? Between 12 goals in the first half and 7 goals in the second half. So in the second half, McTavish lost 24 points in pace, and that's about those 5 goals because of the fewer shots and losing a handful of power play points. Like he wasn't great in the first half on the power play either. Also in the back half, Anaheim was terrible. While McTavish was on the ice, he saw a drop from the first half to the second half of 10 on-ice shot attempts per 60 minutes, which is significant, and nearly 1 expected goal per 60 minutes as a line, which is also significant. So, like, nothing good was happening in Anaheim in the second half. I'm tempted to just blame whatever McTavish shortcoming there was. Like for me, the biggest flag here is the fact that he was barely shooting. He was taking like 1, maybe and a half shots per game. and that's not great. But I'm just going to guess that the on ice product was in such disarray that we can't. I don't want to put that individually on McTavish. And like you said, also Elon McTavish is young. He was drafted 3rd overall in 2021. Right? He's heading into his age 21 season. I go by February 1st, like Hockey Reference does, and his birthday is January 30th. A little fun fact for you there. So yeah, Elon, am hoping that McTavish's first half of 65 points is more representative of what he's capable of. But I mean, we've got to see something. Like we've been waiting for a long time to see something happen in Anaheim, like some sort of cohesion or plan or step forward. And injuries, I think, got in the way last year, but I don't know. I'm getting a little tired of waiting. So
No, for sure.
I'm hopeful McTavish can be a 60-point player next year, but I am not. I need to. It's not entirely up to him, I think, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I see that. Like it's tricky. I think he would be a fun swing that wouldn't be like too risky, but I mean, don't forget also. But again, you can say this about Anaheim every year, I think especially this year, like Leo Carlsson. Hopefully now will be. Remember when he was even having that thing with Leo Carlsson where he didn't even play all the games? So anyways, he's now hopefully eased into the league, even though he dealt with some injuries. But if he's fully healthy, and also don't forget Brian Cutter Gauthier, who Philadelphia had to trade to Anaheim. There was the whole drama that he didn't want to sign with Philly. Anyways, he's announced that he's not going back to college, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but I think I read that. So that could be like really exciting for Anaheim if they have Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier as full timers, and then obviously along with who even knows who Zegras is at this point, and then like Terry and then Mason McTavish.
Zegras is good. Are you doubting that he could be good? I think he's. I
don't know. He's had stretches of being really bad, like this past season in particular. He was injured a lot also, so it's hard to.
I think there's injuries variance in Anaheim.
Yeah, but I'm just gonna say like. On paper, we're looking at a team that could have like a really killer top 6. Like I don't know, like obviously it depends on how like ready Cutter Gauthier is, but a lot of people have him ranked as like one of the top prospects out there, like him and Michkov maybe. Beyond like a Bedard or I don't know, depending how you call your prospects. But and then don't forget on defense, like they have Minchukov and Olin Zellweger, who are supposed to be like really. So I don't know how much longer we have to wait. It shouldn't be too long. These are all like such highly touted players that are gonna hit big. It's just a matter of let's go. But I think when it happens, McTavish is probably like one of the stars. But anyway, I'd feel okay with drafting him. But yeah, definitely not a guarantee. Maybe it's still gonna be a year away. I guess in the same vein, I'll mention Marco Rossi. He was a Red boy. It's not like he was so great in the first half. He was like almost a 50-point player, then fell off in the second half. It's funny because you mentioned Minnesota was like so green boy heavy. Had all these players who did worse in the first half and then improved. So I guess it was at the expense a little bit of Marco Rossi. But with these young players, who knows? So let's jump into an older player, and actually a guy you mentioned earlier on that was involved in one of the Jeff Skinner trades. Let's talk about William Nylander, who earned himself a lot of money with an amazing first half. He had 57 points in 39 games to start the season, 120-point pace. And then he cooled off. He was great in the playoffs. He was like the only Leaf that produced in the playoffs when he finally played. But in the second half, only 41 points in 43 games for William Nylander. That is a 78-point pace, less than point. I'll make my first edit point here. Less than a point a game. Should we be, because like Nylander is going to be like drafted very high. He ended the season with 98 points. Like even if we just go there, that's still something that you're going to have to use a really high pick to get. But do people need to be a little worried that, hey, if you're picking this like basically 100-point guy with a high pick, you should be aware that this guy ended the season as a less than point per game player?
Yeah, you should be. But I still don't think, like, I'll go, I think 100 points for Nylander is still pretty reasonable for next year. I think the start of the season was incredible. And as you know what I'm really learning this year, Elon, about our Red and Green boys. Also, shout out to Ben Burnett, our inaugural Short Shifts co-host, because I think this concept was his to begin with. So we always want to give him some credit.
Thanks,
yeah. Nylander Oh yeah, what I was saying, power play points. Power play points tell a lot of the story in a lot of these situations, and we're going to get to a couple guys I think shortly who that definitely applied to. But Nylander in his first 39 games, he had 21 power play points and 3 short-handed points. All right, so he had 51 special teams points in basically the first half, and 27 special teams points in the second half. And that right there is the bulk of the 40-point gap between his first and second half for William Nylander. He was like really fantastic on the Leafs power play. And this is it seems like it was a product of points participation regression. He was getting in on 90% of the Leafs power play goals, where usually he's in on 65%. In the second half, Nylander was in on about 70% of the Leafs goals on the power play. So I guess the question is, if he was where he should have been in the second half, Nylander, then why am I still which was about 80 points? That was his pace for that. Why should I put him back up to 100? Well, at first, I think the Leafs power play could actually do better than they did in the second half. They had a 5% drop in their efficacy. They were like in the low 20% range, and I think they could probably do a little better. They were above 25% for the first half of the season.
Can I channel my inner Leafs Twitter here for a second?
Guy Boucher. Are you going to talk about Guy Boucher?
I'm going to say this is how you improve the power play. You trade Marner. Okay, you get Morgan Riley off of there, then you have a power play.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad I brought the Guy Boucher. I think he's gone. I believe. I mean, I know talking about the Leafs power play is very hard based on the playoff performance. But
it's so hard to predict. Like, I know you're giving a great analysis of Nylander here. Apparently the Leafs are going to make a lot of changes, or some people are saying they should make a lot of changes. I guess we'll see what happens. We'll see how that affects things.
My expectation is the on-ice product is pretty similar this upcoming year to what it was last year, so I don't see a whole lot changing. But one interesting piece that I did find at 5-on-5, where there wasn't a big change in scoring for Nylander, he was pretty steady in the first in his green half and his red half. I just saw a small dip in shooting percentage, but the piece that didn't actually have a huge impact, but I'm kind of surprised it didn't, is that he had high-end on-ice expected goals numbers in the first half and very average in the second half. Basically, almost 3.5 expected goals for in the first half and per 60, and just over 2.5 in the second half. Again, one great, other pedestrian, and Nylander was playing with Tavares and Bertuzzi in the first half. In the second half, he was playing with one of those guys plus Domi and Bobby McMahon in the second half. And so that didn't seem to work out as well in terms of threat and creating dangerous chances. It didn't seem to impact Nylander's 5-on-5 scoring very much, but it is, I was, it just makes me wonder, Nylander seems like someone who can take over a game, but those numbers would suggest that maybe he needed certain line chemistry more than I would have thought. I'm just floating that. I actually still think he's fine. So anyway, all this to say, Nylander averaged out to a 98-point pace last season. I think that's probably about the right spot. If you make me choose over under, I'm going to take the under. But I'm looking forward to seeing what that power play looks like, because also it's going to change, right? I imagine, since it was so broken in the playoffs, I have a feeling that they're going to be trying a few different schemes so that if something isn't working the way it wasn't working against Boston in the playoffs, they actually have a plan B and C and D, maybe E through Z.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of joking before, but I do think that trying someone other than Morgan Riley on the top power play would be worth it. If I recall correctly, Liljegren looked decent during the time that Riley was suspended, so it might be something to try. We'll see what they do. That's what the preseason's for. Brian, we still have some big names coming up here, some big superstars that people are going to really need to know the answer to when deciding whether to use a top 2-3 pick on these guys, and we'll get to them in just a sec. What, do you think this was going to be an ad-free episode? We're not running a charity here, okay? I don't know why I'm getting angry. We'll be back in just a sec. You're listening to Kevin Carlson. We are back, Brian. I was just mad at myself because I forgot to make an ad break when we're supposed to do it 30 minutes in. But also it's who makes the rules? We don't have a boss. We can do what we want. Oh, why am I getting angry again? Okay, maybe I'm angry because this actually isn't the case. But if I was, I could imagine being angry if I had Bo Horvat in any of my fantasy leagues because I would have felt really good about myself having drafted him because halfway through the year, through 40 games, Horvat had 40 points. Beautiful. I would have been thinking I nailed it. And then after the second half, I would have been like, why didn't I sell high on Horvat when I had the chance? Because Horvat did not do as well in the second half. He fell to only 28 points in his final 41 games for a 56-point pace. Rosterable, but not great. Huge fall off. He ended the season overall with 68 points, but it really does seem like the tale of two seasons. Like when I draft this guy, should I be comfortable that he can be? Because I thought he could be like a point per game guy, like playing with Barzal. It seemed to be going well, and then just kind of fell apart a little bit in the second half.
Sorry, I missed my button.
Okay.
Um.
Oh, well, maybe I'll throw in one more quick thing.
Okay.
And at a point, and I'll mention it wasn't only him, right? It wasn't only Bo Horvat. Like Noah Dobson is right near him on this red boy list as someone who was pacing for 84 in the first half and then fell to 60 in the second half. So I wonder if it makes me wonder if maybe Brian's going to use the words power play at some point in his answer.
I am at some point, but actually Horvat on the whole in the season was not strong on the power play. Like some of the guys that we're talking about, like Philip Hronik and Jacob Chychrun, had a stronger than expected start to the season on the power play, and William Nylander. Horvat did not have a stronger than expected start. He had a very average start. I think he had 12 power play. He paced for 24 power play points through his first 41 games, paced for in a full, so 12. You get what I'm saying, right? That's not 24
Totally.
points. Which is good. Great. You're, that's what you get. You're a top line forward, and that's what you can do on the power play. Good job. But actually, kind of funny. We used to talk about secondary assists a lot as maybe some kind of secret in the recipe, right? Where secondary assists are noise. And if we find the guys who have the most secondary assists and we see that it's not repeatable, then they're just lucking into those points, right? There was this theory for a while, and I think it still stands to some extent, that secondary assists are just noise. If you're getting a lot of those, you're lucking into points, especially if you're a forward. And that's something that's not going to hold up. And Bo Horvat, through the first half of last season, ranked third amongst regular forwards in secondary assists. His number was massive. He ranked only behind Charlie Coyle, who led the league, and Mark Stone. That was it. Those are the only guys who had more secondary assists per 60 minutes than Bo Horvat. On defense, by the way, just to sort of add to this, Cale Makar led in secondary assists, which I believe is reasonably, we can expect that. Makar starts breakouts that are very dangerous. I trust him. Second in secondary assists amongst defensemen, Philip Hronik. Little callback to earlier in the show. Yeah.
Is that just first half or overall?
First half.
Oh, okay. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So all those assists he was piling up. And then Elon, if I told you that a Calgary Flames defenseman with the initials DG was third in secondary assists in the first half, could you guess?
DG.
I do not know this guy. He played 28 games in the first half of the season. I didn't check to see how many he finished the year with. Tell me if you want the first or last name.
Dennis
No, don't.
Gilbert.
Why'd you look it up?
I wouldn't have gotten it. I wouldn't have known.
He only played 34 games total, but he, through the first half of the season, ranked third amongst defensemen in secondary assists. Wasn't enough.
He only had 6 assists or 5 assists on the season.
I
guess
he had
guys didn't have that many.
He had 5 assists in a 3-week span, and I'm surprised it didn't warrant. And he had some hits. I'm surprised it didn't warrant him even a trailing mention in an episode. Dennis Gilbert, everybody. Anyway, so Bo Horvat, 6th amongst all skaters in secondary assists, 3rd amongst forwards. In the second half, Bo Horvat in secondary assists ranked 421st per 60 minutes at the NHL. And that seems like both of those seem irregular to me looking at Horvat's career numbers. I think those additional secondary assists helped Horvat to a point per game in the first half, swung too far the other way in the second. Other than that, I think it's just the. So I think that's what accounted for a dip in Horvat's 5-on-5 scoring. And then on the power play, Horvat also was worse in the second half. He actually, instead of a 24-point pace as he had in the first half, he was pacing for 12 points on the power play in the second half. So, you give him those points back, say, like, he can have those, and you're at about a 70-point pace. And I think that's about where that seems right to me in Horvat's age 29 season. So give me again, like I hate to be boring, but again, this is another split the difference kind of moment here where Horvat, I think, is I'd project him around 70 next year.
Okay, so I mean, I don't think it's boring. I think we just need a number, and so you're saying, yeah, split the difference. He was too hot at the start, too cold in the end. It's Goldilocks, right? So there you go. Predict that he's not going to change too much overall. Okay, let's go to a real superstar here. A guy who was drafted, rightly so, in the first round of many leagues. I think he still will be again, though. Here's a red boy, so you'll let me know if we need to be concerned. But like a Mason McTavish, there's a lot of injuries going on with this next guy, which is Jack Hughes, who was making his drafters look like they got a steal, even if they drafted him like 6th or 7th overall, because he had 45 points in his first 32 games, 115-point pace, was just looking unstoppable. And then, yeah, he missed a bunch of time. He also just barely made the cutoff. He played 30 games after January 11th, which was the exact cutoff. But yeah, only 29 points in those final 30 games. So that's actually William Nylander-like. Also, if you look at those paces, he went from a 115, 120-point guy to just a smidge under point per game. I would not have. I would have been like so excited to have Jack Hughes back from his injuries and would have expected well above point per game. So it is surprising. I forgot that he dipped so much to just being a pedestrian 82-ish point guy, 79-point pace guy, actually, if you look at 29 points in 30 games.
Yeah, and calling Jack Hughes pedestrian a point per game speaks to how crazy the first half was for Jack Hughes. And it was really Jack Hughes in the first chunk of the season. And like I was actually ready to go with the injury narrative here, but I really think for Hughes and for one of his teammates, the Devils' power play was just insane out of the gate. Hughes had 12 power play points in his first 9 games. The rest of the season, Hughes played 53 games. He had 19 power play points. So 12 in his first 9, then only 19. I'm trying to say this more artfully, but I'm failing. Still a 30 power play point pace, by the way, for Hughes, picking up 19 power play points in his remaining 53 games. But basically, 40% of Jack Hughes' power play production this season came in the first 3 weeks of the season, which is 15% of the games. And honestly, I think that's very much it for why Jack Hughes had this 115-point pace through the first half of the season. And then his second half pace was like, oh yeah, just a point per game. That's nothing compared to the first. But I think he's got upside for 100 points still. I think that Devils power play could help him exceed that 30 power play point pace. I think maybe he can still take a step forward too. So I'm not going to put Hughes like at the 80 points that he had in the second half. Plus there was the return from injury, so maybe there was something more to it. But 115 points was not going to be in the cards. And I think some of us really thought it was after the first 3 weeks of the season. So anything else is disappointing. But next year, I still think it's a step forward for Jack Hughes if he does touch 100.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm still really excited about him. And also, there's going to be changes. It's kind of like some of these other players we've talked about where it's like Hughes is going to have his brother, the other Hughes on New Jersey, Luke Hughes, as like, a year more experience. I think he's like gonna very shortly, I think we've talked about it on a show, like become like one of these elite defensemen. So that's obviously going to help the power play once he just becomes better at it and has more experience. So it'll be fun to see kind of how things develop in New Jersey. Also, I guess Dougie Hamilton might be back. But gotta imagine Luke Hughes is holding the power play at this point, right? That'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah, well, I looked back to see if Dougie Hamilton, like I was like, and you know why that Devils power play was so good at the start, but it wasn't true. He was on it for like 3 games, and he had a couple points on it, and then he was moved off, and that was the end of that.
Okay, so yeah, Jack Hughes, we'll see what happens, but obviously going to be a guy that people are going to want to draft in the first round, and I think you don't have to be too worried So that'll be fun to watch. The Devils, like the Sabres, right, really need to get into the playoffs at this point. And actually, let's bring up a Sabre here. We already talked about Jeff Skinner. I guess I should have brought up Dahlin at that point, but I feel like it's a totally different conversation.
Well, could I actually, instead of you going to Dahlin and repeating that mistake, could we just go to Jesper Bratt since
go for it.
Since he's a Red boy too?
Good point. So yeah, Jesper Bratt, 95-point pace in the first half, only 72 in the second half. By the way, I'll also mention back when we were on the Islanders, I could have also mentioned Barzal, who plays with Horvat. He was another guy who slowed down a bit in the second half, but he was still pretty great. But okay, so we're going to Jesper Bratt now. What's the story with him?
He actually got better at 5-on-5 in the second half, but his power play start was also incredible. He had 16 power play points in his first 16 games, and then in the next 66 games, just 11. So, like 5 fewer points in 50 more games, which is, again, speaks to just how off the charts the Devils' power play was. So 60% of Bratt's power play production came in the first 20% of his year, which was great for you then, but I'm sure you were left wanting for the back half. On the whole, though, Bratt still, like Hughes, his power play numbers seem reasonable, like around 30 power play points. Improving that a little, like Hughes, seems doable. And that's the Jesper Bratt story, really. I think, like, some of these guys are Red boys only because they set the bar too high out of the gate, like way too high. Like, and this is a first few weeks of the season. It's not even a first half thing, but the impact was so huge because the production was so crazy. The Devils' power play on the whole, by the way, in their first 10 games, they were 17 for 39. That's 44% conversion. In the remaining 72 games, they were below 20%. With 38 power play goals and 206 opportunities. So they only scored 21 power play goals over the final 72 games of the season after picking up 17 in the first 10. Their rest of season, after the power play cooled off, conversion rate would have ranked 23rd in the league full season. So I have to imagine, and like the Leafs had a really good power play last year, and Sheldon Keefe is over in New Jersey now. And so I wonder if he'll be able to help the Devils get their power play clicking all season long.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see. Okay, so let's go to Dahlin now, who I recall, Brian, on the last show we did before we got into the Red Boy or Green Boy discussion, we talked a little bit about what was going on in the playoffs. And if you recall, we were talking about Evan Bouchard and how insane his playoffs had been. And you said that you felt like he's gotten up to the Rasmus Dahlin level in terms of fantasy defenseman, but not like to that top level of like Roman Josi and Cale Makar and whatever. So, and then, clearly you were right, as we saw from game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. No points for Evan Bouchard. So there you go, Brian. You're right that he's clearly not an elite player. I kid, of course. No one could get anything past Bobrovsky in that game. But going back to Dahlin, like, I don't know, looking at these numbers, it makes me even more concerned that Dahlin is like up there. Like, I feel like Evan Bouchard feels like a tier above him, because while Bouchard was like point per game all season long, pretty much the same first half and second half, Dahlin was great to start. He had a 68-point pace halfway through the season, but yeah, then he fell off. He was only a 51-point defenseman in the second half. So he ended up in total with 60, but it was really like 70 and 50 if you want to split it. I guess the question is just, how are you going to explain the dip? Is this just going to be like a power play? Like, hopefully you're not going to say he set the bar too high in the first half, like you were saying about the Devils, because if that's the case, then maybe we need to lower our expectations for Dahlin moving forward.
No, with Dahlin, I actually think his first half, that 68-point pace, is representative of what we can expect from him next year. And I think we can tack on some more for power play regression. Like Dahlin's power play through the year in Buffalo was rough. He only had 20 power play points for the full season versus 32 power play points the year prior. So, I actually think I think maybe his true number is somewhere in between. So that's one piece. But at 5-on-5, the reason that's the main reason that Dahlin lost so much of his pace in the second half. And his points participation was high in the first part of the season. It was 62%, which is about 15 to 20% higher than you'd expect for a D of his caliber. But it fell all the way down to 30% in the second half, which is too low. His shooting percentage dropped 5%. Again, it should have regressed a little, but It might have regressed a little too much. So I have faith that Rasmus Dahlin is going to be his first half self. I'm not picking the middle here. I'm going to say that 68-point pace at the start of the season is something Dahlin can aspire for and even top next season. I would love to see the Buffalo power play come out swinging this year. It was dark days basically all season long. I think there was like a brief moment of sunlight, but I remember, Elon, at the start of the year, like Dahlin and we were talking about Tage Thompson too a lot, and the unproductive power play was a big part of the story, and it never really found its legs. So let's hope they start strong and can keep it up all the way through next season in Buffalo.
And Matt here in the chat, Schwab Squad, is asking Brian, should we have any concern, though, about the challenges of Owen Power being another year more experienced? Bowen Byram is now in the picture. Should we be worried that they eat into a bit of Dahlin's ice time?
You tell me. Like, I'm not worried, but I'm usually not. Like, I'm usually the last to worry. So, like, sometimes I worry. I worry too late. Like see Dougie Hamilton. So I think it's Dahlin's. I think he fits exactly the profile you'd want on a power play quarterback. But I understand there's two players who would probably quarterback a power play in several other teams in the league.
Yes, maybe Buffalo fans on the Discord can chime in if they think we're not good. Like, Brian's just looking at the numbers, seeing that Dahlin can be better. So, yeah, Sabres fans, please let us know if we should be concerned that Dahlin is going to be threatened either at even strength or on the power play to lose some time. Okay, I got 3 players left for you, Brian. First of all, I want to go next to Detroit, a former Ottawa Senator who got his bag finally, made a big splash on the Wings, getting a big contract, 4 years. What is he making? Like $7.8 million now. So year one was looking really good. Looked like Detroit had themselves a beauty. He had 38 points in 41 games. Things were going well. And then, Alex DeBrincat really slowed down to just a paltry 58-point pace for the second half of the season. 29 points in 41 games. Obviously, there were some changes in Detroit. Patrick Kane came in, and he played with DeBrincat for a lot. And Kane did well, but yet DeBrincat slowed down. So I'm curious to know what you think. Patrick Kane's a free agent now. I guess we don't know what the lines are going to be over in Detroit next year and what they're going to do in the offseason. But I'd imagine DeBrincat, who wasn't he like getting bumped from like the power play? I guess you'll tell me in your answer. I feel like I recall he was getting bumped from some prime spots. So I guess we'll see. I'd imagine if you're a Alex DeBrincat manager, you're hoping that he's playing with like Larkin and Lucas Raymond, right? Like, so I guess, and on the power play, if that happens, you'd expect that a guy of his caliber should be able to be like this like 70-ish point player. Hopefully that second half isn't representative, but I'll be curious to know what you think.
I am hopeful that Alex DeBrincat has a better season next year than this one. I think there's room for it. I think there's a couple caveats here, though, and I'll get to them after just sort of summarizing. DeBrincat dropped a half a point per 60 minutes in his second half. Some of that was because he was shooting at 12% to start the year and finished the year shooting at 7%. His true shooting percentage is probably somewhere right in between. But the good news is that his points participation was stable, his expected goals were stable, his shots were stable. So even though his shooting percentage dropped for DeBrincat, he wasn't changing much in his game. This was just some expected regression. So I think, with that said, the 67 points in the middle here seems fair, but I am curious about the power play for DeBrincat. It was one of his less productive power play seasons, both in total. He only had 19 power play points, but also in a per 60 way. I think both of those can be somewhat explained by this business of the split units in Detroit, where they're doing like 2 units, 50%. Neither one seemed like they had the right amount of personnel to load up one unit, but instead they watered it down and ran 2. So I'm curious to see exactly what happens in Detroit next year on the power play, and if that top unit if there is a top unit and they get top unit billing, then I could see DeBrincat eclipsing 70 points, which is what he did in the first half of last season. Thanks also to 5 power play points in his first 6 games, which makes DeBrincat an honorary New Jersey Devil, because that turned out to be a full quarter of DeBrincat's power play production from his first 6 games of the season.
So Shane Gostisbehere is a free agent right now. So I guess that'll be a big thing also, because I guess that's one of the reasons Detroit ran those two power plays is they had Sider on one and Gostisbehere on the other. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Detroit does just go back to having one power play. I feel like they could, but I guess we'll see if they're ready to give Sider that job. Okay, so Brian, let's do another defenseman here. We'll end with a defenseman and then a forward who was on that defenseman's team for the start of his career. So we'll see if people can connect these dots. But I want to go to Arizona, talk about Sean Durzi. He was a big sleeper going into the season, going to this new team where it looked like, okay, I feel like while Durzi was second fiddle to Doughty over in LA, he should get the shot to run the power play. And it was looking like a really savvy pick for anyone who grabbed him because he was still falling pretty late in drafts. And he was really solid. He wasn't like insanely amazing, but a 50-point defenseman don't grow on trees. And he really started looking that way. He had 21 points in his first 34 games. Also, Sean Durzi was getting really solid peripherals, decent blocks at least, decent number of shots. So yeah, it was looking like a really great pick, a really great, like if you had him as your third defenseman, you were kind of laughing. And then yeah, unfortunately, just kind of disappeared. And he like held the power play. I remember on the podcast, we were like, what are we going to do with Sean Durzi? He's not doing anything. And we were like, well, if he's on the top power play, you would think he should be able to produce. But just, yeah, right at the end of the season, he started getting some points. I see he had a 4-game point streak to end the season, but he still is a red boy on the spreadsheet. 20 points in 42 games. So imagine how bad it looked before those final 4 games. But yeah, so only a 39-point pace in the second half. Going into next season, I'd imagine Durzi's still running that top power play over in, sorry, not Arizona, over in Utah, which is good, which I still need to wrap my head around here. But yeah, so you would think that should be a good situation for him. Utah is another one of those teams that has some young players that should be getting better, kind of like what we were saying about Anaheim. So you would think that could be better. Like should be better for Durzi if like Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther, are like on that power play with him and now a year more experienced and better. So what's your take on Durzi going into next season? Because I think once again, you're going to be able to get him at pretty decent value in the draft. It's just a matter of if he's going to be able to keep up what he did in the first half.
Yeah, well, the first half, and actually specifically the first quarter, Durzi had 6 power play points in his first 21 games, which would have paced him for 24 power play points, which is high, even on the top unit. I wouldn't have expected. Like, that's good. I don't know that yeah, that's not something I'm ready to like fully buy into for Sean Durzi. But a big chunk of those power play points were goals, 3 power play goals in his first 21 games, and he had actually 5 goals on 40 shots. So it took a couple shots a game, had 5 goals. It was shooting 13%, and basically that was like a huge chunk of Durzi's overall production for the season. He ended up with 16 power play points, so he had 10 more power play points over the final 3 quarters, which is like 3 power play points per quarter if you do the math. But also to go with this is that while Durzi started too hot, he also like went too cold later on. So I know like he had this really barely rosterable pace for the back half of the season, 39 points. And the first half was 51 points. And after I'm already saying like, oh, a lot of it was unsustainable, I actually think that you could still expect like hope for 50 from Durzi next year. I'm not gonna roll that out that he can be closer to his first half than his second.
Okay. Yeah, I think Utah is going to be one of those teams that's really going to be tough to peg a lot of these guys because kind of, again, like I said, like Anaheim, it depends on so many like other players. Also, like who's going to step up, like who's not. Like we know Clayton Keller's great. We know Schmaltz is solid. And after that, it's a little bit tricky to peg. And yeah, so that obviously is going to affect your number one defenseman if he remains that. Who's that new guy they have? Oh, they have like Maverick Lamoureux. I know at some point he's going to be on the team, and he's a pretty highly touted prospect. I wonder if he's someone. Utah fans out there, let me know if you think... we have to change our tag, Brian, on Discord. You know how like you can reach out to fans of certain teams?
Oh, yeah.
We got to change the Arizona... How many people are on Arizona right now? I'd be curious to know. It doesn't seem like a team that gets talked about too often on our Discord. Kevin in the chat here is asking if we talked about Mason Marchment. No, I skipped him. He is a red boy. I figured like we talked about him during the season. I'll quickly give his numbers now since he's asked about here. We always appreciate our patrons who come join us live. Wait, is this Kevin? Like our Kevin? Kevin A. Bear? I don't know. It just says Kevin. But Marchment was really good in the first half, right? 32 points in 40 games. If I recall correctly, there was like a stretch where it's just like that line of him, Duchesne, and Sagan, was it? Like, were scorching. And then, yeah, Marchment kind of just disappeared for the second half. Basically a half point per game guy. Marchment also, I believe, didn't do anything in the playoffs. Let me bring up his playoff stats here. Mason Marchment had, in the playoffs, 5 points in 13 games. So, yeah, he just strikes me as someone that I feel like the reason I didn't bring him up to you, Brian, tell me if you feel the same, was like Marchford just feels like obvious. Like, yeah, he's not that guy that we saw in the first half. I think he's like clearly like a half point per game guy. Like that's just kind of the vibe I have on Mason Marchment. Tell me if you feel differently.
Yeah, like I agree. Like with a lot of these guys we're talking about, I think there's upside and like hope that maybe they could be that guy. And Mason Marchment, well, we'll see what happens in the off season, right? Like
Let me give you a comparable.
Okay.
Tell me, I think Mason Marchment is Trevor Moore. What do you think?
Okay. I think he's Trevor Moore, but with a little more like raw offensive talent.
Okay, I meant for fantasy, like, but okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I get what you're saying. Like,
Well,
Trevor
like,
Moore,
I
feel
think-
like and
I
Marchment
think
both like went hot for a while.
Yeah, I think the upside is probably a little higher for Marchment than it ever really has been for Moore. But yeah, he's gonna need to get a change in deployment. Like his looks are gonna need to change for him to really be seriously considered as an option.
By the way, Brian, Matt in the chat here disagrees with you. Says Trevor Moore is way better, and he does not deserve this slander.
I love Trevor Moore. I liked Trevor Moore before it was
Doesn't
cool.
sound like it.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe I'm being unfair to Trevor Moore, or maybe I'm just being more hope. Trevor Moore, I just feel like we kind of know who he is, and Mason Marchment, there's a little more unknown. But like, if you ask me to pick one guy to roster for a random week next year, I would at this point pick Trevor Moore.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. And actually, I wanted to end, if people were able to guess it, on Trevor Moore's teammate, Andrej Kopitar, who is our final Red Boy of the season to discuss. And yeah, Kopitar looked like he's ageless. He started the season. Well, that's for context. Last season, Kopitar had 74 points, a really great year. That was actually his top points he'd had since 27-18 when he had 92 points. After that, Kopitar turned into like more of a 60, 65-ish point guy. I guess he did have a 73-point pace season when they were having those shortened seasons for COVID. But yeah, came off a 74-point season, and going into last season, he started off doing even better. He had 37 points in his first 38 games for an 80-point pace. It was looking like just Kopitar doesn't slow down, and then finally looks like he did. He hit a wall a little bit, well, at least relative to what he usually gives us, down to only 33 points in the final 43 games for Kopitar, 63-point pace. This is a 36-year-old player, so I feel like a narrative could easily be spun that he just like time's starting to catch up with him, and maybe that second half is what we should start to expect as we move forward to an age 37, 38 season. Like even we just saw Joe Pavelski, who started last year strong, couldn't keep it up, and then kind of disappeared in the playoffs. And now, by the way, I don't think we mentioned it, Brian, announced that didn't exactly announce that he's retiring, but Pavelski was like, he's not going to play next year. But he didn't announce it. So maybe, who knows, maybe he's going to train and play the following year. But anyway, what do you think about Kopitar? Does he still have it to be a point per game guy like he was in the first half? Or do you think that was the last time we'll ever have one of these Red Boy, Green Boy spreadsheets have a half of a season with Kopitar as a point per game player?
He did look like he slowed down. Like he shot less over the back half of the season. Kopitar also like had fewer expected goals per 60 in the back half of the season. Curiously, Kopitar played 40 more seconds a night in the back half of the season, but I think, it was kind of a net. Like I think the second half 63-point Kopitar is probably closer to what we should expect in his age 37 season than the 80-point. And like he keeps doing this, like we keep sort of vacillating between like he's still this point per game player or forget it and just count on 60 to 65. And he refuses to be one of these players for very long and keeps changing between them, which makes him really hard to pin down. But I think for me, I will say Kopitar finishes closer to 63 points than he does to 80 next season. But I also I'll take the over on 63 points as well.
Yeah, I feel like every year in fantasy drafts, you get to like Kopitar, and I feel like he hangs out for a bit at the top of the queue for some people, or like, the default, and you're just like, am I going to take Kopitar here? He's so just like, the upside, like there's going to be players taken around him that just feel like they have exciting upside. Like maybe there's going to be younger players like this guy can like hit like 80 points, 90 points, and Kopitar you just feel like probably around 70. And then sometimes he does go like this past season, like half a season of being above. But I think I'm with you, Brian, that at this point, if I could get him for value, sure. But I'm probably gonna not expect more than like 65-ish. And even if like I was looking at another 65-ish point guy with him, I might go with the other guy just because I'd be excited about the potential for more upside. Obviously, depending who we're talking about, like maybe it'd be a fun conversation, like a Mason McTavish or Andrei Kopitar when I'm drafting. Like I kind of think I'd be going McTavish, but who knows? That could end up being like a dumb mistake.
McTavish over Kopitar?
I think so. I just feel like there's so much more to give. What's Kopitar going to be like? You just said Kopitar's like a 65-point guy.
Yeah, it's like, oh, sorry. I heard you said McTavish. I was thinking Marchment.
Oh, okay. So do you want to just go back and retake that? And I was like, I think I'd take McTavish.
Yeah, sure.
I was saying I'd take McTavish over Kopitar. That's just kind of what I said. I was like, I think I would take him. Is that dumb? Like, yeah.
Oh, so I still respond.
You could still respond.
Yeah.
I was saying just because of the upside. Like,
and the off nights, like that's where I'm going with this. But I think Kopitar's upside is probably higher than McTavish's for next season. So I might lean Kopitar still as being like the sure thing, and like maybe you're trading off a handful of points. But I think the trade off is like trading off maybe a couple points for less risk.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if it's. I guess that's the thing. It's like with these young players, like
what is risk?
McTavish,
yeah, like I get it.
I feel like the
I
upside
get how
is higher.
Right, and I get that McTavish's risk could be considered lower too. So it's an interesting thought.
I like patrons.
Yeah.
I think I would rather go McTavish and just like go for the. Anyway, that's how I feel. But yeah, I know Brian always likes those steady guys. But 37-year-old, at some point they're not going to be that steady. Chris is saying in the chat that Kopitar might be next year's John Tavares, which I'm trying to parse in my head what that means.
Well, Kevin is saying that Tavares might be next year's Tavares.
Well, I don't know what that means either. But I'm looking forward to seeing some elaboration here in the chat. But while I wait for that, Brian, let's finish off this show. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this year's edition of Green Boys and Red Boys. Thanks to all of the patrons who are supporting us up to this point in the middle of the off season. We're hitting a bit of a dead zone. We've got like the Stanley Cup Finals, which is a lot of fun.
Way to pump up the crowd.
Well, I'm just saying
we're hitting it. Thanks for listening. We're hitting a dead zone. Well, no, it's
these next few weeks are like nothing that exciting is going to happen for fantasy. We're going to see two teams play against each other a bunch of times.
What kind of podcast? We didn't even lead by talking about this. Like this is the first mention of the Cup Finals. This is who we are, though.
I made a joke. I think you weren't paying attention about like how Evan Bouchard is actually nothing now because he couldn't score against Bobrovsky.
I guess I missed that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, we also know that when the Stanley Cup is awarded, Cupful registration opens.
Exciting.
So
yeah. And we're going to
dead zone. Yeah, right.
Does that mean our next episode is going to be talking about all the Cupful feedback and what rule changes we're going to make? I always love that episode of the podcast.
I don't know. I sketched us out a little schedule. So I would refer back to that.
Oh, okay. So you're not going to answer, but I think the answer is yes. Brian's always telling me that I need to go look at the documentation, a lot like my other coworkers. But anyways, Brian, let's wrap this baby up. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back, like we said, in a couple weeks, and then we're going to really get going soon because we're going to have the draft. We're going to have free agency. It's going to be a blast. But until then, let's cue the outro music. And why don't you go ahead, Brian, read us the credits.
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dauber Hockey and powered by our patrons, including our super supporters, Paul, Roman, Don, Michael, Jordan, Brian, Patrick, Aaron, Philip, Ivan, Sammy, Andrea, Zach, Tom, Ryan, David, Ricard, and Patty. Thank you all. Thanks to Kevin Hebert, our Cupful coordinator, who gets a shout out just for being his wonderful self. And we will be planning with Kevin to get that Cupful registration on the go here. Elon and Shams are still sharing tweets on GameDayTweets.com, so that's where you should go. Logo art by BrandonWeeb.com. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dauber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dauber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Freakin' Friendly, Cap Unfriendly, The Athletic, hockeygoldies.org, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and that's it.
Okay.
Google Docs, Google Sheets.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, you say Google Chrome. I use that also. Mac OS. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And yeah, we'll be back with another episode soon. And until then, Brian, what should we be keeping on our mind while enjoying the Stanley Cup Finals?
Make sure that however you're enjoying hockey, and that might be through fantasy hockey, you're doing what you can to make sure that fantasy hockey and your own hockey enjoyment is something to be enjoyed by everyone.
That was a long one, but I liked it.
Did it? Not sure the syntax made sense.
All right, pal. This was great. My baby's up, apparently.
Oh, no. Since
She's
when?
been apparently coughing. Dina said she went in and anyway, whatever. There's a bookend for the people who were here from the start.
Oh,
but
goodness.
so I'm going to head out and we'll see what to do. So thanks for everyone listening. Thanks for, Chris and Matt here in the chat. And Brian, I'll talk. Oh, and Kevin, he never answered it. Which Kevin?
It's not. Well, I like that you said, is it our Kevin? Like that Kevin belongs to us.
Well, the Kevin that we're good friends with and chat with all the time. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna go. So bye everyone. See you later.
Thanks, Chris, Matt, and Kevin.
Okay, so just
And
wait.
Elon.